Well, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on how to approach your ERP selection during the pandemic. I'd like to say that we have our panel of thought leaders. These are people who SelectHub works with, who we regard as thought leaders in ERP, and they're here to sort of answer some questions that we've been getting and help us through, what is normally a challenging situation. Dealing with an ERP selection made more challenging, obviously, by the pandemic and all the challenges and change in business environment that we're dealing with. I'd like to say right up front that probably on the side of your screen you see an area with questions. We do have questions that we are asking our panelists to start with, and then if there are additional questions, feel free to put them in the panel. And we'll see at the end if we get to them. If we can't get to them, our panelists can always follow up with you afterwards to connect and see if there's anything else they can do for you. So without further ado, I'll move forward into the first slide here. So, one of the things that we've been looking at is, experienced ERP selection professionals or IT selection professionals, as well as, somebody new into this process. It doesn't seem to matter. People are, dealing with a lot of new things that have been brought on by COVID-19. Considering that an ERP system is so critical to our business, we don't want to be in a situation where either things are being missed, the selection process is being hampered in some way, or we're missing visibility on things because we can't get the information we need in a timely way, or people are just not available. So those are some of the things that we're going to be talking about. As you can see on the right hand side here, people are either upgrading or getting new ERP systems for a lot of different reasons. This is a recent survey that SelectHub ran. Obviously accounting is one of the key areas, but it could be for a lot of other areas as well, as everybody knows, whether it be inventory, manufacturing. We go down the list here, or it could be a situation where the line of the type of business has changed so much, or there's a new line of business, or there's even a new customer that may require a change in the way you process, you run your business or you operate. We can look at this pandemic, and obviously nobody has, the answers, but we're generally looking at, a pretty tough year this year, and most of the economies around the world that are key to world trade and business are expecting actually very good years in 2021. And here's a chart from the International Monetary Fund. We can see that the U.S. is expecting a strong recovery for the year 2021, and pretty tough times this year, as everybody knows. And just to further set the table for what we're talking about here, things have changed dramatically in a very short time. And we can, obviously we know that industries like, the airline industry, lodging, anything to do with travel, cruises, of course, and a lot of other industries that require, people to be close together and, expose themselves potentially, are having a tough time of it. Whereas, on the right side of this illustration, we see that anything that's online, like that's able to manage with e-commerce, online grocers, meal kits, and any of these places that are well set up already to do online business or e-commerce are faring much better. Now, we've seen a lot of companies now trying to pivot as well. And I was talking with the panelists earlier about one of the companies that is really a winner in this pandemic, and that is Shopify, which is a company that helps small businesses make that pivot. So when you look at the stock market, there have been these winners and losers, and the companies that are helping businesses deal with online processes are certainly having a better time of it than other companies that may be stuck in a brick and mortar type situation. And this also obviously goes for companies that are operating. As we know, a lot of people are working from home, and in some cases this has been very productive. In other cases it creates a lot of problems, and certainly with an ERP selection, we sort of have to rethink things a little bit. So this is why we've invited these panelists to help us walk through some of these key considerations and sort of think through some of these challenges together, and maybe make some recommendations. So our panelists are Laurie McCabe, who is a co-founder and partner of SMB Group, Lisa Anderson, founder and president of LMA Consulting Group, and Leonard Smith, our director of professional services, and myself, I'm hosting. You'll see that we have LinkedIn. This slide deck will be made available afterwards, and you can certainly follow up on LinkedIn with any of the panelists, and you can also look them up. They have websites, and I'd be more than happy to help you out. So without further ado, I'd like to pass it on to Laurie to start this off with ERP selection. And beyond functionality, when selecting an ERP vendor or solution, what are some of the things that we need to be thinking about? And Laurie, maybe you can start by responding.
Sure. Well, I think that, in general, you always want to start with your own internal assessment. What are the goals for for your business, right? And really think about that and outline not just the goals, but, what specific business outcomes you're looking for, what resources you can bring to the table to get this thing up and running, what external resources you're going to need, and then what are some of the external factors you may have to take into account. So whether that's regulatory issues, supplier partner issues, all those kinds of things. And, I think another thing we've really learned over the years is that right sizing this thing for your business is really important, right? You get something that's not robust enough, it's going to fall short, right? And if you're overbuying something more complicated, you're going to get lost in the complexity, and it's just going to be probably too hard to use. Mm-hmm. So I think those are really important. I think with COVID, but all in general, you want to look for flexibility. What's the pricing model for this? And is it easy for me to dial up and down? You talk a lot about the cloud. Obviously, the cloud certainly makes it easier, but even within that, there's different pricing models based either on consumption in terms of transaction volumes and things like that, or based on, per user per month. And the devil's really in the details of these contracts and how hard it's going to be to dial up or down. And then personally, I think, we see in our surveys the biggest reason SMBs in particular end up wanting to replace a ERP is it's too hard and expensive for them, right? Mm-hmm. So I think right off the bat, you need to look at something that's got a good interface, an interface that isn't going to be an obstacle to people using it. It's an interface you want that's going to be very intuitive and easy to use, because that's going to bring you more productivity and more value more quickly.
Mm-hmm. And have you heard of any types of things that the vendors are doing to accommodate, this, radical change in the environment for customers?
Yeah, we've talked to some vendors that are doing things that are very, tactical, like providing their customers with capabilities to monitor the PPL loans and, the re-onboarding of employees and salaries and things like that to help them manage that all from a financial perspective. And I think everybody, ERP vendors are always kind of out there when it comes to business intelligence, analytics, dashboarding, things like this. But I think that this whole crisis has really made everybody realize that having access to good information, easy access to good information, and being able to act and pivot as you need to adjust your business depending on what's going on, like, switching to telemedicine if you're a healthcare provider, or maybe moving to, new transaction systems, kind of no-touch transactions, or recategorizing workers as essential or non-essential. You need that flexibility. So I think a lot of customers are looking for those kinds of things that may not have always been, as it says on the slide, as top of mind before COVID.
Mm-hmm. And Leonard, do you think that companies, how much of an impact on the functionality side of things do you think, the current pandemic creates?
Well, definitely it creates some. I think some of the stuff that we've seen so far, we're in unprecedented times. We really don't know. We've never been through this before, right? And I think some companies are impacted more than others. Some manufacturers that I've seen, their businesses have taken off because they're in a sector that, maybe manufacturing masks or some other survival equipment, right, that they may have and they're producing. So there are different circumstances for different ones, but I do think that there has been an impact for sure on businesses, positive and negative in some cases. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of thinking that in some cases, supply chains may have to be rethought completely. Lisa, what do you think about that?
Absolutely. Many clients are looking at reshoring or reevaluating where they're getting their source of supply from, and they're definitely looking at changing customer requirements. Not that they're changing them, but that their customers are changing and evolving their requirements, because as consumers' behaviors evolve during this pandemic, it's going to change what they're going to need to innovate, and it's going to change possibly what they supply to their customers. So there's quite a bit of supply chain change and disruption going on.
Right, and just to finish off on that point, if we're looking at these kinds of changes, just the realities of maybe, certain suppliers are no longer as reliable, perhaps, in some cases, and somebody's already down the road and they're at their shortlisting point with their ERP vendors. Lori, do you think that maybe they should consider going back to the requirements stage and reassessing rather than pushing forward with what they may have had before? How much of a difference do you think that could make?
I think that's a good question, and something companies should consider at least taking another look at things, right? Mm-hmm. Because things are changed, and what I think, again, this is really underscored, is the need for flexibility and agility. And if what you selected, maybe it ticked off all your boxes, right, in terms of what you needed 3 months ago, but maybe it's not as adaptable and flexible and things like that, because we know, again, from our surveys, companies right now, they're introducing new products and services because of the pandemic. They're going to new ways of selling what they provide. They're reskilling workers, or rejiggering the workforce in some way, shape, or form. So there's so much change going on. So I would think that flexibility right now really rises, to the top of the list. And even business model flexibility in terms of, we used to be able to put people in nice, neat categories like manufacturer, distributor, et cetera. And now we're seeing, companies are definitely, across more than one industry today.
Okay. Yeah, moving forward with the idea that you've gone through this requirements process, or you're going through a requirements process, and just looking at this list of processes that make up a technology selection, a software selection, ERP selection, obviously starting on the requirement side and moving through to the vendor evaluation and shortlisting, the other types of inquiries, possibly RFIs and RFPs. We see that each of these processes has the implication of different types of groups within the stakeholder community for this selection project. You have end users, you have the IT department, you have sourcing, procurement, and of course you have the executives all the way along. And Leonard is going to talk to us about how we look at these types of tasks and the implication of the people involved, and how we can keep things on track when there's a question of we're not able to just hop on planes and travel and deal with things the way that we might have. We're not able to have vendors come on site and show us things the way that we might have. And so, there are a lot of questions on how to keep these things on track, and whether or not some of these proof of concepts, how do we deal with those things? And Leonard, maybe you can start with your thoughts. Yeah.
Yep, thanks, Roy. I think, there's various stages to this for sure. And people who are in the process or have been in the process of changing out their ERP systems or reevaluating where the gaps may be within their company. I think some of the stuff that's already been mentioned, supply chain is a big one. I think distribution and logistics is another one. I think, a lot of the areas that people need to look at, even to give you a good example, grocery stores who typically, may use an ERP system in a traditional manner. Today, now they're doing groceries online and creating, sort of a distribution chain out of their stores. So I think, things tend to change. And I think in the changing times, people who are used to working in offices, and maybe don't have the opportunities that to work remote in the past, now they're forced to do that. And I think, especially in managing an ERP project, there's so many facets and areas to look at and business processes to assess. I think to manage it correctly, I think you need to focus on, good project management is being a discipline to use, but also what tools you use, right? Mm-hmm. How you communicate, how do you have stand-up meetings, that you have to do virtually now, where you used to do it in the office. So those types of things I think are very important, and how you adapt to those I think are very important. I think one thing that this has brought out into a lot of companies is it realizes the gaps that they actually have. I know companies that have done a lot of manual processes in the past, and it worked just fine for them. But I think now, because of either their business has been impacted and they had to cut back, or they had to speed up, depending upon what industry they may be in, I think it's very important that you try to assess the gaps while you have time now, and also work on the business processes to improve those. There's a lot of areas, as you've mentioned before, in an ERP system, whether it's supply chain, distribution and logistics, finance and accounting, any of these things, I think, are all areas for improvement. But how you manage those and what tools you use for the remote community that you have now, I think is very important. So you need to focus on some of those areas too.
Mm-hmm. So. Do you think it's necessary to have vendors come in and, demo different parts of the solution that they're proposing? How do you see that working in a practical way? I know we can do these things online, but are there any areas where we need a little more creative thinking to get through the process?
Yeah, I think quite honestly, it depends, because I'll give you an example. Let's say you're an auto manufacturer, right? Your business has been impacted because sales have been cut back.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of areas, you want to see stuff demonstrated in your factory to
Mm-hmm.
see how it works. So if
Right.
you have a vendor come in, you've got to figure out a way maybe to keep yourself 6 feet apart, or social distancing, in certain areas. But for the most part, you want to see that run in your environment. So it's
Mm-hmm.
very hard to do a remote
Mm-hmm.
type of demonstration there. So I think under certain circumstances, you still got to figure out a way to keep safe while you do allow vendors, especially for critical applications during these
Mm-hmm.
times, to be able to come in, right?
Yeah,
So
I think that's the point that I'm looking for is if if you are in this process and there are some critical tasks and functions and capabilities that need to be demonstrated, um, it's such an important thing. And I think what you're saying is that we have to find a way to identify, what those critical things are, and then make the preparations to actually have somebody come in and show us those critical parts.
yeah,
Yeah, I
Is
mean,
that Go ahead.
if you're the physical and digital world thing together, you're trying to digitize a lot of the things in the physical world, but obviously in a lot of cases you can't eliminate the physical world, right? Like the
Hmm.
example Leonard gave. And I was just reading about the Gap, who, the Gap stores, which have, really sped up their whole deployment of robotics in their warehouses.
Hmm.
And it's a good thing they did, because I myself waited about a month for an order that I had ordered online, and they were just unprepared. Everybody's buying casual clothes now, and everybody's buying them online, and they were not prepared, and they were just woefully behind in shipping things out. But I mean, that's a perfect example. You can't really know if that's going to integrate and work well and do all the things it needs to do with your existing systems and everything else online. Now, financials, on the other hand, you can probably get a pretty darn good idea online if
Hmm.
the financial software is going to do the job for you, because that is something that you don't need to touch and feel and physically interact with, right?
Right. Lisa, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree for certain cases, like, in a manufacturing environment, if you are utilizing like IoT, and obviously that has to be connected. For the ERP selection portion, I find that whether the suppliers show up in person or not, really the demonstrate it doesn't affect the demonstration in any way. It's more
Hmm.
of the relationship building that occurs more in person, which which has its advantages and disadvantages, because it depends on if they're just trying to sell you software, or if
Yeah.
we're talking about the functionality. So it
Right. I guess
depends.
it could be an advantage in some cases when you want to keep to a certain time frame and move on to something else. Obviously there are a bunch of different stakeholders for the different parts of the process. So key in that is, the tools that Leonard mentioned. There are tons of tools out there for, these types of meetings, but then you get into the project management aspect of it, and there are a range of tools for that as well. Obviously, Select Hub is one of those tools that specializes in the technology selection area specifically. Okay, I'm going to move on to the whole idea of implementation, and this raises the question. The graph here is obviously the growth and the projection of cloud ERP, which I think most people know, has just been growing and is basically being adopted by almost every type of company. So it doesn't really have any stigma attached to it anymore. In the early days, there were issues surrounding security and so forth, and I suppose there still are. But for the most part, people have been able to work around any of those questions. So, Lisa's area, one of the things that you may be able to help us with is, what's the vendor position in terms of them, providing the additional support, hand-holding, investment that may be required to keep things moving forward in an ERP implementation. And and on the user side or on the buyer side, can we be strategic in the priority areas of an ERP in terms of the implementation process? Maybe you can help us out there, Lisa.
Yeah, absolutely. So it completely depends on the vendor that you're working with, but for the most part, the smart vendors, which one would hope we're working with, are going to find ways to expedite the benefits associated with their pieces of the section, and be creative in how they work with the clients in terms of implementing the software. So there are many ways we could go. Do you want me to talk a bit more about how to expedite those benefits?
Yeah, well, I'm sort of thinking of it in terms of the process and the cost. Especially if you have people involved that are on an hourly rate and things like that. Specialists and even implementation. I'm looking at the building of different types of things like dashboards and migration of data and other types of analysis that might need to be done, that might take longer, that might be hampered somewhat by people in disparate areas and some difficulty in getting everybody on the same page.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you see that? What should we try and expect from the vendor in these situations? And what other considerations could we have? Yeah.
I think we should take definitely a proactive approach in working with the supplier, because they will. It depends on the supplier, I think, but they'll come to you with some sort of suggestions or ideas. However, if we take a proactive approach and really think about which pieces of this project do we need to move forward on. So if you think back to like a critical path kind of thinking, what's really on that critical path, and how can we keep those pieces moving, and not spend as much time and money on the other pieces, so that we can just keep the priorities moving forward. And then, as Lori said earlier, it's keeping an agile and flexible thought process as you go forward, because as things change in our environment, as our customers change, as our suppliers change, our volumes changing, and actually there could be quite the need to bring on some additional functionality nearer terms. What I'm finding is the people who can respond quickly to changing conditions, which technology enables them to do, it helps anyway, are going to succeed much more than anyone who doesn't. And if you can utilize technology to automate and to reduce the amount of labor you have to have on hand, let's say, then you can be much more successful in meeting the requirements and moving your company forward. So what I'm saying here is that I think we should keep the critical path pieces moving, and then instead of, like, let's say you were meeting monthly previously as a steering committee, you may need to move it to weekly and just do quick check-ins to say, what's changed? Should we reallocate resources? Because there are fewer resources available, or I should say, generally speaking, we can't afford as many resources. So how do we keep this project moving at less cost, but actually moving faster in the critical pieces? That's what we want to accomplish.
Laura, you had mentioned earlier about right sizing, and I think that's a key thing. When you talk about ERP, we see sometimes companies have bought these systems and they don't necessarily need all the bells and whistles that have come with it. And when we look at a situation like this, do we consider implementing in stages? Maybe an initial stage where you can get an immediate benefit, and then this further down the line stage, once the dust is settled a little bit, you have a clearer view of what's actually needed, and you have these other operations in mind, but you don't necessarily need to go to them right away. And having an ERP vendor accommodate you in that timeline and in that roadmap. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, I think that aligns well with what Lisa just said. It's about, you have things that you absolutely have to do and change in the business, right? And you need to be able to do those first. But then you need a solution that is underpinned with a flexible platform and architecture, so that as you implement and hopefully are successful with, phase one, which you had to get done right away, you can, move easily on to phase two. So in terms of right sizing, it's really about finding something that you can grow with, not outgrow. So in other words, it's not going to kill you to deploy what you need to deploy to get started. I like to call it incremental but integrated, right? The approach that, at least for SMB customers, small and medium businesses, kind of what you really want, right? You want to be able to do this in an incremental way, in pieces that you can digest in the business, but you want it to all integrate and work together as you add new pieces. Right. And so I think it's really about finding a vendor that maybe they have an industry edition that's going to help you maybe get more of what you need right off the bat for your core industry, but then also give you that flexible architecture so that you can add on as you have the bandwidth for.
Yeah, and just to follow up with you, Lori, would you expect that in some cases it may be useful to sort of break and I don't want to upset anybody, but break the licensing plan of a vendor because of the situation where they may have a license plan for an overall product, and then you're going to cherry pick some things that you can do immediately. Should we expect them to be more flexible about these types of things?
Yeah, today, yeah. I don't think there's a vendor out there that's not negotiating and discounting and adding, it's kind of like the commercials we see all the time for furniture stores, buy now, pay no interest, for 18 months, right? I think now's the perfect time. I mean, you can probably, I won't say get them to do whatever you want, but you're going to get them to go a lot further right now than a lot of them would have been willing to do. The caveat I put in there is, don't bend somebody till you break them, because you're going to get crap then, right? But you're looking for a vendor that you can work with, that is willing to work with you, so that it's a win-win in the end. I mean, you don't want to go in there to try to get everything you can and put them out of business. That's not in anybody's best interest. Right. The approach should be optimizing that you can come back or you can grow and you can start to pay more as you grow, right?
Yeah, I'm definitely finding the same, that the suppliers are more than willing to talk about how to create a win-win. They're definitely in that mindset.
Yeah,
and I will say, right now, there are a lot of vendors out there that, some of the big vendors have actually have their own lending arms, right? And so in addition to banks and the federal loans and this loan and the other loan, some vendors are loaning. And even if you're choosing a cloud implementation, if you need to buy a whole lot of clients, let's say, if it's part of an overall solution, you can go to a Dell. So, or an HP or something like that. Even if you're not installing a lot of back-end infrastructure yourself, as long as you're wrapping in enough of their content and what you're doing, there's a lot of avenues now to get money cheap.
Good to know. And Leonard, you had a comment?
Yeah, the only comment I was going to make, I think, and kind of supports Lisa and Laura's take on what they're looking at here, is just the fact that in the environment today, I think it lends itself more suitable to a SaaS environment because you can dial it up or turn it down depending upon what your needs are. So if you start out with finance and accounting and you just say, oh, I need product data management, so you can turn that module on relatively quickly, if you know your business processes, so on and so forth. But I think it lends itself more than an on-premise environment, to dial it up and dial it down. So.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things though is in a lot of cases, those modules come with a fixed cost to start with, and maybe your situation has changed. So you still need the module, but it's at half capacity type of thing, or half the capacity. I know that some of them do have a scale cost type of thing, but I think what everybody's saying is that the vendors are willing to work with you. Or should be willing to work with you on things like that because the situations change. Everything that you projected may have changed. So yeah. So what I'd like to do at this point, thank you. What I'd like to do at this point is move to just a wrap up and talking about, takeaway, Lori, the advantages, disadvantages, or what you like to say, the impediments or drivers to moving forward at this time. We just heard about some of the advantages. Maybe it's a great time to be dealing with a vendor because they're going to be more flexible. And heck, we're not, we have to keep going forward. I'm sort of selling the advantages right now, but have to keep going forward through this because we know, and everybody is projecting that obviously we are going to get out of it, and they're projecting big things for, as we get out of it. There's pent up demand and so forth. So we can't really afford not to move forward if we had planned to in many cases. But Lori, I'll let you speak to a summary of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think Leonard mentioned it before, but we probably had more change in the last 3 months thrust upon us than we've ever had, right? And so all the little warts and flaws in the way you do business have, been totally exposed, right? And I think that brings a sharper lens to decision making in terms of how you need to plan and go forward and what you may need to do better and what you may need to do differently. I mean, not everything is clear, but we definitely know that this pandemic is really accelerating this whole digitization, digital transformation. Everybody that can automate and be flexible and can have agility has an advantage, and we've seen that. So hopefully, a lot of businesses have seen how they need to change, what they need to change, and how they need to be able to iterate almost continually, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just to support what you're saying there, as Leonard had brought up earlier about, people looking at a lot of their internal processes, many may have been manual or inefficient one way or another, and now through the pandemic, they've had to switch things up a bit, and it gives an opportunity to look at these processes, and it may be, a net win in terms of optimizing those processes. As we move out of this and having an ERP system and a new system or an existing system that can support those new processes. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, exactly. And then on the flip side, I think every fear, uncertainty, and doubt, FUD
Hmm.
is the biggest impediment, and people sometimes hesitate to make a change because they are not 100%, and no one can be 100% certain anymore what's going to happen. And I think Lisa mentioned you may have less resources, less people, less cash, all kinds of things. So every company has to kind of make their own decisions. But I would say, even though we don't know what this new normal or new abnormal is going to look like, we definitely know some things. We know more work's going to get done remotely. We know that we're not going to want to touch things, whether it's to take an employee's temperature coming into a building. We're going to want systems to do that, or it's to process a payment transaction. We know companies are going to need more flexibility with supply chain. We know they're going to have to do more fulfillment online and selling online. So we do know some things. And I think very generally, and I think in every business, you probably know more specifically. And I think you have to go towards those things, because if you don't, you're just going to get paralyzed. And, sadly, I think others in your industry will evolve, and you're going to kind of be left behind in a lot of cases.
Hmm. Right. So as we talk about, Leonard, these advantages and disadvantages, you kind of take the angle. These are some of the things that Leonard had thought about. From a point of view of keeping the project going, and we talked about requirements and how maybe they've changed from initial thinking. Can you speak to some of these pros and cons?
Yeah, I think some of these we covered, but also it doesn't hurt to mention them again, because I think a lot of things that have been stressed here is change is going to occur. So we know that, and talking about the vendors, talking about software packages, talking about where you started out maybe before this pandemic happened and where you're at today, your businesses could have even changed. So
Hmm.
I think the important thing is, how do we manage that change, right? What cost impacts do we have? What resources, as Lisa has mentioned, right? Lori mentioned about different things. I think those are things we need to just manage our business better. And in order to do that, I think we need to look at our software that we use, our resources. I think if it's done anything, I think, how we test the systems, what gaps we have, where we need to look. I think it's put um, a real strong focus on the areas of our business that may be weak and
Hmm.
where we couldn't meet demand, or where we've lost productivity, right? Because of factories shutting down and resources, not being able to work. So I think, and it varies across all industries, but I do think the components of an ERP system are mainly the same, in the fact that, if you have a bill of material, or you have distribution and logistics, or you need to change different things, different aspects of it, I think those have to be managed very closely now. And if you're not used to working remote or with virtual teams, I think communication skills are important, as well as what tools you use to create that. And I think it was Lisa that said earlier, maybe have weekly meetings, right? I mean, yeah, I've seen people go to 15 minutes every day, to
Hmm.
try just to keep the communication open. What's going on? Where are the shortcomings at? But as far as implementing an ERP system, I think now, especially if your business is downturned, now's the time to hit it hard, to get back up and running with better processes and close those gaps before you get impacted by a demand that you may not be able to meet. So,
Right. So, a little bit of downtime has obviously that benefit where, a lot of these resources, stakeholders in an ERP selection, are pretty busy people. And if there's an opportunity to, get some mind share from them at a time when, it's a critical process, that's, certainly something that you could take advantage of.
Yeah.
Any other comments on that? Oh, we'll
Just
move
one
ahead.
other, just
Yeah,
one
go
other
ahead.
thing. No,
Sure.
just one other thing, Roy, that I was going to mention that Laura mentioned a few minutes ago. Vendors are also very aggressive right now. So
Mm-hmm.
not that you're looking to get a cheaper thing, but they might have downtime too. So you can
Yeah.
take advantage of their subject matter experts in certain areas and certain software that you may not have had the opportunity to do before. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that's another advantage that companies have today if they want to take advantage of it.
Right, and Lisa, one of the things that you were thinking about was the resources in your company and education. You want to speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that's largely taking place right now is on average, people have more time than they did before. I mean, there's the exception of people who manufacture PPE equipment and those kinds of things. But basically, for the most part, people have some additional time and they're concerned. They don't know what this new world will look like. So instead of becoming distracted and concerned,
Mm-hmm.
if we can focus their attention on how we can not only build their skills, but also move the company forward in a more successful way. So if you have the ability to, for example, as I was talking earlier, speed up your responsiveness to customers or become more agile in in what you're providing, or introduce a product more quickly, or service, those types of things, which if you have the software and the tools to do that, it helps to certainly helps that happen more smoothly and quickly. So it's an opportune time to invest in the education of key employees, and also to hit the ground running when volume comes back up. It is not going to be a situation where you can just flip a switch and suddenly we're going to be producing or serving customers as we were before. So there's the law of physics: if objects in motion stay in motion and objects at rest stay at rest. Well, we need to get them moving. So we should, this is a way to get them moving in a positive direction. And it also can provide some engaging opportunities so that your employees are thinking about, like, this is great. I'm being provided an opportunity. I can help with the future, and they are much less likely to leave. I'm seeing clients actually have several people start to move because maybe they can move closer to their house, or who knows, lots of reasons. But
Right.
this will keep them engaged.
Just
Yeah,
just to go ahead.
sorry. No, it just brings to mind a couple of conversations I've had recently. One is with a vendor who's making a lot of training that used to be fee-based, available at, no fee, and getting, of course, great uptake. And so the companies using that, they're getting much, they're building the expertise in their company. And then another company who I was talking to that, most vendors have these communities and get all kinds of inputs and ideas. But it seems to me that at least this one vendor was really ramping that up and really trying to put these customer ideas, make them actionable more quickly. And in some cases, the customers were figuring out how to do something, right, with the software that they needed to do and telling the vendor, and then the vendor was making that available to more of the customers. So I think in a way, it's a great time to be very engaged in these communities, whether it's to learn or, contribute or to voice ideas.
Yeah, providing value right now is really what every ERP supplier should be thinking about. Not I know this sounds crazy, but not about making a sale. They should be thinking about providing value, and then it'll all, it's going to come around to the other side.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Lisa. And to circle back to talking about these employees, working from home for the most part now. We hear that a lot of companies are saying, well, we're having more productivity. But as you mentioned, Lisa, so that's a good thing. And maybe frees up some time to do this additional education, like you say, investment and making people feel like, they are valued and there's, an interesting path forward for them. But as you said, I mean, people are also looking at this and saying, well, okay, if this is going to be the new normal, maybe I should rethink what I'm doing and where I can do it. And that may change their idea of, I don't need to be just a few blocks away or, a short drive away from the office because, these other companies will take me on. So, yeah, I think we have to be careful that the employees, we don't want to lose good employees. And you want to make sure that they understand that the company's investing in them and they see a good future by sticking through this with the company.
Absolutely.
So, are there any other things that anybody has comments on these points? The last ones here.
Well, the other one that I would add here, on the disadvantage side, you certainly have to be able to afford to do it because you don't want to put yourself out of business. So, I think, Lori and Leonard mentioned there's plenty of creative ways that you can look at where to gain cash. Even instead, there's companies that instead of laying off, they've reduced salaries and those kinds of things. Well, for sure, all the suppliers are willing to work with you, and if not, question this choice of your supplier. So there's always ways to do things. Right. And work ahead, and then the cash will come as you implement a return on investment to some degree. So there's lots of ways to maneuver that.
Yeah, and as Lori was mentioning as well, there seems to be a lot of money out there, and if you make your case, there may be ways to think creatively about it. Like you said, maybe people are working a little bit less days. Maybe they would appreciate that for a little time. Some of them, I think there's an understanding globally that we have to be creative at this time. And so people are more willing to, go with some creative ideas like that. So I'd like to finish off the initial question parts there. And I don't know if we have any questions. So I'm looking at, just give me a moment here. And I'm just going to see. Long questions. Yeah, so somebody's looking for total business solution inventory management, system, POS, accounting, CRM, to organize and grow my business. Shall I start with only the accounting or is it example, or is it better to select an integrated business solution that solves all my problems? Lisa, you want to take that?
I get the integrated solution that you can add to incrementally, right?
Yeah.
Because, or they're part of an ecosystem, that they've got the other components that you can snap in that are pre-integrated. But one thing we find is that a lot of companies, they end up spending more money integrating things after the fact than they do like just getting, the actual solutions. So, and there are, I'm thinking of two for the SMB market that would have, I think, everything he mentioned or what the questioner mentioned, which would be Acumatica and NetSuite.
Yeah, and actually, I'm working with a client right now that's looking at this exact issue. Should they just go live with finance first because they're on another system that's not going to be a go forward system, or should they look across the board, and you know, we adjusted the project in an agile way because we started this right at the beginning of the pandemic. So you know, generally speaking, it's going to add up to be more over the long run to you know, to try to bolt on different pieces, as Lori's saying. I completely agree with that. The trick here is you don't want to just pick any solution. So, you know, doing maybe a rapid assessment of your critical requirements, and then go with a solution that will cover all those bases and just ramp up slowly, because there's no, you know, the majority of the money is spent in the implementation, so you can save money there.
Mm-hmm. Leonard, you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what's been said by Lori and Lisa. You know, I think too, understanding your business processes is critical before you start. And I think Lisa just mentioned that. I mean, I think those are things that you need to look at. And also, when you start to look at those things, I think a mistake that a lot of people make, it's like eating an elephant. You know, you just have to take one bite at a time. And most systems, I mean, if you're talking about a CRM package, you're talking about a warehouse management package, you're talking about, you know, a basic of ERP, the finance and accounting. Can you integrate different packages? Of course you can. But as Lisa said, you know, you might run into other conflicts with that. And then the support aspect of it. So I think it's better to sit back for a minute, look at your critical processes, business process, put your requirements together, gather those, and then make an assessment. I mean, that's what, you know, not to sell Select Hub, but that's what Select Hub kind of does and tries to help walk people through. But I think it's to determine what kind of software package you really need. And, you know, whether it's NetSuite or any of these others, Acumatica or Sage or any of the rest of them, there's over 200 in the market space. So which one's the right one for you? It depends, right? So.
Right, exactly. Yeah, there's just one more question. Go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to say this industry focus, I think, can really come into play and save companies a lot of time too, because, you know, if you can get 80% of what you need already kind of pre-configured, and all the people we're talking about, all the vendors we've mentioned, bring this to the table. So, but if you're in, you know, whatever industry you're in, you don't want to have to reinvent the wheel. So that's going to help you, I think, make it more digestible too.
Right, so you have the package and you have the industry bolt-on or module that can go with that package. And
hopefully it's not a bolt-on. Hopefully it's you know, the solution configured for industry X, Y, or Z, right? And what you find is looking across at these different vendors, you know, some of them have boiled the ocean and they have like a gazillion, it seems like, industry editions. But a lot of times you find like vendor X is really strong in these 6 industries. Vendor Y is really strong in these others. So, you know, it kind of makes it a little easier, I think, because it kind of narrows things down. Like if you're a professional services firm versus a, you know, small manufacturer, you may be looking in very different spots right off the bat if you start looking at where these companies have the deeper industry expertise.
Yeah, I mean, one industry comes to mind is retail, right? There's a lot of disruption right now in retail. A lot of them are brick and mortar. They're trying to get into e-commerce now. And so I could see that as an area where, you know, ERP vendors maybe need to step up with additional services, hand-holding, and plans for those types of companies. And, you know, some of them have been online, but it's been a secondary concern. And now maybe it becomes a priority. So they may need to rethink those types of things. The other thing is, you know, we talked about it a little bit earlier, and just to finish off, we're hearing about, you know, on-premise and cloud or SaaS and ERP systems. And I'm wondering if somebody had started off thinking that they needed on-premise, what sort of thought process do you think you might want to go through if you haven't, you know, yet made your decision entirely, but you've been going that direction with an on-premise system?
Well, I think that you would want to really actually, I find people start off thinking that, and then they evolve anyway over time. But I think you just want to think, the pandemic's changed things slightly in the sense of who's going to be willing to go on premise. But I think that the concepts are still the same. What's going to be your, do you have a disaster recovery process? Do you have can people access the system? Can you keep it up and running remotely? So if you can do all of the best practices remotely, then on-premise could be the same thing as being in the cloud, because after all, the cloud is just a server somewhere else that's handling all those things well and is meant for that. So, but I find that typically speaking, less companies are going to be willing to put what they have to put into it today, especially with the cybersecurity issues that are ever increasing, especially during this pandemic.
Right.
You have to put so many more resources into it. It's less likely that you're going to go on premise.
Right.
Yeah,
Exactly. So go ahead.
100%. And I would also add that, the whole beauty, or not the whole beauty, but a big part of the benefit of the cloud model is that those vendors can really amortize or spread the costs over all this, not just infrastructure, but expertise. So like Lisa said, whether that's in security or adding in new machine learning and AI capabilities, or natural language processing, all the things that maybe right now you don't even know if you need them. But again, are you going to be able to bolt those on? And we deal mainly with, the smaller customers. And I have to say, in 99% of the cases, the answer is probably no. So those cloud vendors are going to give you kind of automated access to this level of expertise that's going to be really hard for you to have in-house.
Yeah, I think another aspect of that too, I mean, just to expand upon kind of what's been said by both Lori and Lisa, if you look at it, you talk about on-premise. On-premise, you've got to have a data center set up, you've got to have cooling set up, you've got to have network, you've got to have a pipe to the cloud, you've got to have resources, experts, right? A system admin to run your server, maybe a network administration person, you might have to have different subject matter experts in the ERP system. So if you add up all those costs, and not only that, it's capital expenditure. So, you've got capital investment, which is very costly. And do you put all that in place and spend $500,000 to put it in place and then find out that my selection wasn't that great, right? Or maybe I should have gone to a SaaS model where I pay $48 per month per user, as many users as I add, and that's the only cost that I incur. So, there's a lot of advantages, I think, to going with SaaS models, especially for smaller companies that don't have the infrastructure and that stuff already set up. Even for some large manufacturers, I think it just depends. I mean, if you have a business need that forces you to do on-premise, like you're running a manufacturing line and it can't ever be down, right, more than 5 minutes, because you'll lose, production. So I think there's a lot of thought process that goes into that. But I think just off the cuff, I think SaaS model is a lot cheaper to get into for sure.
So as long as it fits your requirements, which for the most part, there are a lot of products out there, obviously, that are in the SaaS model that do pretty much everything. So I guess you have to think long and hard these days before you're moving to an ERP on premise. So I'd like to thank everybody and finish off here. We're showing the slide here for the Select Hub guided selection packages. We can obviously help anybody out, with some advice, and then let you know of options if you're interested in any of the selection services that we have. A lot of the stuff that we do is based on our platform and basically holding your hand through the process. Obviously, we have our subject matter experts as well, and also for Lori and Lisa, I will be sharing this slide deck, and you can contact them directly. Their LinkedIn's are on the slide deck, And we'll have some additional questions that were asked, and we'll try and reach out to people and respond to those questions as well. But thank you very much. Our time is up now, and we appreciate your attendance. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Bye now.